First of all, I just want to say hello and welcome back to the AAVSO How-To webinar series. We are trying out a whole new format today. Instead of having a main presentation, we have brought in 4 top experts on observatory automation, and we're going to have a panel discussion. It'll be like one big hour-long Q&A. Now, I'm pretty excited to dive right into this, but before we kick off the discussion, I do have a few quick announcements to make. First of all, we are running Zoom in webinar mode today, which means that you get access to a couple of special features. First and most important is the Q&A button, which you can find down at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the Q&A button, you can type in questions for the panelists, and I highly recommend that you do just that. Another button, which you can find down there at the bottom of your screen, is the CC button. Probably says something like show captions. When you click on that CC button, you can enable or disable Zoom's automatic closed captioning. Good one to have in your toolkit. Next up, I'd like to give a shout out to our other monthly webinar series, which is sponsored by the National Science Foundation. It is entirely in Spanish, including the title, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. In English, it translates to The Science of the Sky for Beginners. Each webinar introduces basic science and astronomy concepts and provides opportunities for casual discussions between presenters and participants. It's totally free and aimed at the general public, age 12 and up. We shuffled around the schedule a little bit, so we actually get 2 broadcasts this month, and we will continue to broadcast these Spanish webinars on the 3rd Saturday of each month all throughout 2023. Please feel free to spread the word about this series to your Spanish-speaking friends and colleagues. And now, back to the webinar at hand. Our 2023 How-To series is sponsored in full by Boyce Astro. We'd like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge them for their generous support. The Boyce Research Initiative and Education Foundation provides online astronomy education, observatory resources, and research experiences to students, student teams, and schools in order to learn how to perform observations, conduct research, and publish their results in scientific journals, such as the Journal of the AAVSO. Please do check out their webpage to learn more about their work. Alrighty, get these slides down here. It's time to introduce the panelists. So, just going in order on my screen here. Peter Bilo is an AAVSO board member, section lead, and observer. He has over 50 years of experience in building and using telescopes, and he's an experienced end user of automated systems, having made over 19,000 observations with the AAVSO Net automated telescopes. Recently, he's begun building automated systems himself and has been working together with Alan Slisky on fully automating an impressive telescope and observatory for the ATMs of Boston. All right, now is
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Peter. Now is a good time to introduce Alan Slisky. Alan Slisky is a physicist, engineer, and inventor. He has co-founded 6 startup companies, has over 35 patents, and is a practiced expert when it comes to electronic, mechanical, and optical research and development. Honestly, it's almost easier to answer the question, what doesn't he do? He's currently consulting for advanced amateur astronomers and educational organizations, doing observatory design, automation, and engineering. Really great guy to ask about those things.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Alan. All right. Stefan Berg is a professional software engineer with over 10 years of development experience. In 2016, Stefan created N.I.N.A, or Nighttime Imaging in Astronomy, a popular open source project that helps astrophotographers capture stunning images of the night sky. Stefan is also an astrophotographer himself and is well versed in the intricacies of automation, both from a developer and a user perspective.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Hello, Stefan. And Bob Denny is the CEO and software developer mastermind of DC3 Dreams. His software, ACP Expert, is used by premier observatories around the world, including the AAVSO Photometric All-Sky Survey telescopes, which use ACP Expert's AI scheduler to automatically observe 1,000 square degrees per night. And on top of all of that, he's also the originator of the ASCOM Initiative, which, if you're not familiar, is the reason why we have standard compatibility among astronomical software and hardware. You can thank him for your mount being able to talk to your computer. All righty.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello, Bob. So these are the expert panelists. And to get started, I would like to ask each of you guys to share just a little bit about your background. So tell you what, let's start with you, Bob. Could you please show us ACP?
Well, I'm not going to show you ACP there, but what I will do is start by screen sharing a picture of the Great Basin Observatory right here. How'd that come out? Oh, I have my
Looks great.
question.
Cool.
Okay. This is the first scientific permanent observatory in a national park, and it was put in by a consortium of companies, like a gas company and some other people in Nevada and Utah and California, and 4 colleges in the area, and it runs completely remotely, automatic schedule. The public is not allowed. It's in an admin area of the Great Basin National Park in the eastern part of Nevada, near Baker, Nevada, and it is the Park Service surveyed the skies in their park, and this is the darkest, best sky in a national park in the U.S. And that's why they put it there. So, in fact, the night sky survey used our software as well. So, to tell you what makes our software different from most others are 2 things. The remote is, in order for it to be easy to use remotely, it has to be totally automatic. In other words, you can't sit there and babysit anything. So it makes it possible to have an observatory like this without letting any of the students in on the computer on the observatory. It has a web interface, which I can show people later if you're interested. So that keeps people out of the observatory and yet lets them use it. It's totally automated, and it is designed for remote access. Also, the sequencing of work from all of these students, they don't fight over time slots. There are no time slots. It's a scheduler that takes advantage of what people want as far as the conditions under which their images are to be acquired. How high above the horizon, air mass, whatever. And it will then bounce around and do what it needs to do. There's no timing. It's not like a machine shop scheduler. It doesn't optimize things at the beginning of the night. I can talk more about that later, but it's a totally automated and dispatch scheduler. You can't predict what it's going to do, basically. So the combination of that means that a student can just get on, do their thing, put in their requests, and then wait for their images. That's the short story anyway.
Very
and
cool.
This is
That's a remarkable system. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay.
Right,
So
let me drop this off of here.
next
There we
up,
go.
okay. Peter, could you please show us one of your automation projects?
Sure. Let me just do a screen share a bit. Why am I not seeing it? Oh. So I'll actually back up a slide. These are notes for myself. Here we go. So this is prior to automating. So this is my backyard observatory. I've got a 12 by 16 foot roll-off roof observatory. 2 telescopes in it right now, a 130 millimeter f8 APO and a C11, both on astrophysics mounts. And the reason we need to automate and have remote observatories for New Englanders is because of the picture on the left, which is this morning here. It's just, the weather's just very ugly. And for my automation, I'm kind of doing automation light. I have several laptops running, one running each system presently. And I have Ethernet to my house, to my network. So life is good there, but I've decided to leave my roof manual. You can see a blue line there, which is my from my pulley to open the roof. So I don't need to worry about roof opening and closing. I don't need to worry about weather so much, having weather sensors, because I'm close by. I can be in the observatory in a minute and a half from the house. But I've also had the pleasure in working with Alan as a minor person in automating or getting our ATMOB Middleman Astronomical Observatory up and running, which is fully automated and remote. And also I'm a user of AAVSO net. I've got about 19,000 observations from that under my belt. And this also goes to show there's a lot of room for different software. While I'm just starting to use N.I.N.A on my own home observatory for both AAVSO net and for Middleman Astronomical Observatory, we're using ACP. So there's a lot of good software choices out there. It's a good time to be an amateur astronomer trying to do automation.
Hear, hear. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next up, let's hear from Stefan. Stefan, could you please show us your software?
All right. So let me show you quickly what N.I.N.A is about. So the main thing about N.I.N.A, it's free and open source software about telescope automation. So it's very versatile. You have the ability to connect to various equipments that you need for your automation runs. And it's also approachable. So what we try with the software is to target the beginner, but also the sophisticated astronomer. So we have users that only have like a DSLR and a telescope, and we have users with a full automated setup with a dome and a stationary setup. So personally about me, I'm using a mobile setup. So I have everything set up as far as automation as it goes, so that I can set up my equipment in like 15 minutes and I can start the automation run. So I set up my mount and equipment, set it up, choose my target in N.I.N.A and can start the imaging run. So to show you how this application is looking like, so you will start at the equipment screen where you can connect the various equipments. You have a sky atlas with a database of the most popular objects where you can filter what you want to image for the night. For example, tonight I could image the California Nebula if the weather would be allowing it, which it does not, unfortunately, to do a live demo. But I will show you, at least in the simulator world, what this would look like. And I could go ahead to the framing assistant here and see how the image would look like. And finally, I could add this to a sequence that I would prepare beforehand. So there's a template system in place, so you can set up exactly how a sequence should look like, and it will repeat itself for every night, basically. You just say, I want this target with this template that I have. You add it to the sequence. It will then add it here to this advanced sequence. You can plan it step by step what you want. So it can be from a very simple approach where you just take some exposures and slew to a target, to a really sophisticated setup where you have a full automation of the whole night or even multiple nights that's possible. And finally, when everything is running, you have this control center, so to say, where you have everything in place, or as far as information goes, where you can see everything, what's currently running and so on, with the current images and so on. And finally, I want to mention the plugin system that is in place, like for over a year now, where other users have provided really great plugins that extend the core functionality of N.I.N.A to take it to the next level. For example, we have a whole new focusing routine. We have this 3-point polar alignment. We have like this, what is it called? The light bucket plugin, where you can send your imaging session data to a website. Or we have, for example, the ground station, which can send some notifications to your phone when something goes wrong, so you can interact with it. So yeah,
wow,
that's it.
That's extremely impressive. I know we're going to get a lot of questions about that. Thank you, Stefan.
Okay.
Okay, and finally, Alan, would you like to show us one of your automation projects?
Sure, I have a couple of slides and I will go through them very quickly.
Thank you.
This is a project I did for my friend David Middleman, who's standing in the doorway here. This is on his house. This was started about 10 years ago, and he tragically died of a brain tumor about 5 years ago. So this observatory, when the house was sold, was donated to the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. And we now have it up and running. We have some new equipment that the club purchased, a new camera, filter wheel, and we have about 8 people that meet weekly and attend to all of the issues. We have a nice team of people. We have a fellow who enjoys sort of running it, even, it's all done through ACP, but he's the point man for taking requests and getting the inputs into ACP scheduler. So this is another view of that system. Highly populated with cameras, filter wheels, focusers on a mount, but you'll notice there's no dangling wires. So one of my pet peeves is getting rid of bad cabling. It's a continuous effort. And this actually uses a Wi-Fi bridge to get all the information off the back of the telescope. So the only thing running up to the mount is a power cable. This is another project, 36-inch Bowler and Chivens in New Mexico, wonderful dark sky location. This telescope came from Princeton, and I've just installed new direct drive motors on it, and it's nearly up and running. It's also been converted from Cassegrain to Newtonian with a new front, and it has a rotating diagonal mirror with 4 instrument ports. This is the other end of the universe, which is a very modern architect designed observatory, New Hampshire. The owner told the architects he wanted to look like aliens live there, and they succeeded. This is the inside. It's got an 8-inch refractor, and I'm automating the dome and the shutter and things like that, so this can be run remotely.
Very cool.
It's a couple of examples.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, that's very enlightening about all y'all's background. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty picking who would be the best to answer this question. How about Bob or Alan? Would one of you guys like to take the question? Just what does a night of observing look like when you have an automated setup? What's the overview? Real high level.
I'll do a little bit and Bob can add. So fortunately today, basically you can watch TV and take a nap. That's what a night of observing looks like. While the computer and all of the instrumentation is checking the weather, setting up things for the evening, taking calibration images, and then deciding what object is on the list of things to do is best to attend to, given the conditions at the moment. Bob?
Okay.
I think we ought to give Stefan a chance at this, because he's got, for a hands-on automation system, it's amazing. That's all I can say. So what would somebody do, Stefan? What would a night with N.I.N.A look like?
Night with N.I.N.A. Yeah, I can quickly share how this would look like again. So let me take over the screen sharing.
Okay.
So basically what I've already prepared here. So you start up the application, you connect to all your equipment here, like I've already showed you. And let's assume everything is already configured. What you want to do then is you want to choose a target. And for that, you can, for example, use these filters here. You want something to be above your horizon. For that, I have already set up a custom horizon. That's a special file that you can point yourself to, which is just a map of your azimuth and an altitude which defines your horizon. And this will be shown in this altitude chart here on the right side. You can see exactly this is how my backyard will look like for this target. Also on the imaging screen, you can get it in a different view with a 360 view here. This is outlined here. This is my horizon in my backyard. And with this filter, you can say, this is my imaging time, and I want the target to be 3 hours above the horizon during this time frame, for example. You can also say that you want the moon to be at a minimum distance of of, for example, 80 degrees. For example, right now we have full moon, so you want the moon not to interfere with your imaging run, so you want it to be as far away as possible. And then you go ahead and choose what would be a good example here. Right now, for my backyard, it's not looking so great. But for example, we can use, let's say I will start late in the night today with a Messier 13. Then I go ahead to the framing assistant. I have chosen the offline sky map and also downloaded the optional offline sky maps that will pre-populate the images for it. That's also available on the homepage from N.I.N.A, where you can basically just use the offline sky map for a planetarium like you, where you get all the plates already rendered, you can zoom in, look around how you want to frame your target. And once you are satisfied with it, you can also change the rotation, for example, and you say, this is how my image should look like. You can go to adding the target to the sequencer. I've already put a target in, so I will just update the existing target in my sequencing layout. I will choose a template. So for this, I want to use my RGB template. And you can then see it will be added here. And now I can go to the sequence screen. Everything is already pre-populated because it's based on templates. So this is just something you have to do once, and then everything will be working. And now you click play and it will do exactly this and do the image acquisition for the California nebula.
Very nice. Okay,
And
thank you.
For it's a night of observing with our software is quite different, although the elements that Stefan mentioned are still covered. And let me share something with you that will give you a quick okay, here we go. And let me bring this to the front. And can I not share my, for some reason, the windows aren't showing up. Let me try this one more time. I can only see the screens, which it didn't used to do this. Let's try this. No? Huh. I can only share the whole screen. So now I'm going to have to make my browser the size of the entire screen, and hopefully this will come through as a big giant picture of a browser.
Yes.
But are the chat boxes on top? Let me put them away.
No, we can see.
Okay. So you can see my thing here. All right.
Yes.
So of course this doesn't need to be a night of observing with ACP Expert is that the automation will start up all the equipment, do all the connecting of equipment hands off. It just happens at the right time in the evening. It opens up at the right time. And then if you do sky flats, it will take the sky flats at the right time, wait until it gets a bit darker and start observing. And it picks the things that it wants to observe at the right time based on constraints. So what I mean by that is I've got this thing is covering. This is hard to do because I can't get. Do you still see this? Can I get
still
this?
See your computer? Yeah.
Okay. Let me make this. I had it full screen, but what you're probably seeing the stuff up here, but oh well. Okay. So I need to be able to scrunch this down. This is a system status. When it's running, you'll see everything that's going on. Again, this is all based on the web, so you can do this on a cell phone. But to go back to what Stefan showed about how to pick the times and the conditions, this is the key to the scheduler is the constraints. And I don't know how to make this larger, but if you look, you can pick a moon avoidance, an air mass range, an hour angle range, a horizon, and then whether the moon has to be completely down. And there's also a sky condition, and that's basically either for photometry, whether it's a photometric night or a semi-photometric night, or for astroimaging, it usually is driven by seeing. And then you tell it priority. And if you want to repeat the entire series of that you put up here, and all you do is you put in the images, well, the coordinates, right? And then what images you want. And then finally, if you want to monitor something like a star over periodically day after day, you can put the monitor interval in here, or you can cause it to to observe at a specific time. But most of the time, what you put in, you notice you don't put a time in. The scheduler picks the time, and it picks it based on these constraints. So it will do its very best to acquire your images under the constraints or the conditions that you specify. So here would be a typical database for the scheduler that you might see.
Bob, I'm
Here's
sorry
what-
to interject here. We are running a little bit short on time. We do have an overall time limit that we're going to need to keep
Oh,
to.
all right.
So if you could go ahead and wrap this up in about 30 seconds, just finish your current train of
I
thought,
will
and then
do
we're going
that.
to move
I'm
on
not
to the
going to
next
go
question.
through anything more than to say that this is totally hands-off. And here is one set of targets that was set up to run over a period of months, as you can see.
Mhm.
And it's done all hands off. So a night of observing with ACP Expert is you just wait for your images to come in.
All right.
That's it.
Fantastic. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. So we do have a couple more questions I'm going to ask for context, and then we're going to start taking questions from the audience. So one of those contextual questions here is what is the minimum set of equipment which is necessary to pull off automation? And in this case, I'm talking about hardware, putting software aside for right now. What do you need to actually own before you can successfully automate your telescope?
I can answer that.
Okay.
You need a observatory that can open and close with, computer control.
Mhm.
You need a telescope mount that's suitable for automation and can be initialized without manual intervention. That a lot of the less expensive mounts don't do that. You have to be there to say okay on the remote control. You don't want that. You need a telescope of some sort, and it can be an 80mm refractor up to Palomar.
Mhm.
So, and then you need a filter wheel, unless you use a color camera, and a motorized focuser. And that's and some sort of typically flat panel, some sort of computer control flat panel. You need to be able to turn on a light source. It gives you a flat, uniformly illuminated surface, so you can do your calibration images. And a weather sensor.
And a roof that or a dome that can close if the weather becomes unsafe. I will say this: in the backyard, it's okay to have a manual roof. If you're doing it in the backyard, when the weather goes unsafe, you just blow a big loud horn that'll wake you up so you can run out in the backyard and close. And that's a better, in many cases, a better solution, not in many cases, but in some cases. And the cases I'm talking about are the roof that needs to have a parked scope in order to safely close without smashing your scope. That is probably the number one source of tears for me, is those kind of enclosures that, then what? It's
Right.
it's a bad design. I noticed that, Peter, somebody showed an observatory which has had a vaulted roof, and the best solution to that is architectural and not electronic with sensors and park sensors and stuff. Because if that stuff fails, your equipment just gets wet or dusty or snowed on. So it's a bad idea to lock the scope and the roof together.
Okay. Yeah, great point. Thank you. Okay. So that's a pretty good overview of the minimum equipment. Peter, Stefan, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that list, or should we go on to the next question?
Yeah, I was actually going to add that that list is for a fully remote, mainly for a fully remote system. If you have a backyard observatory, or you're going to be relatively close by, you can actually have a telescope out under the stars by itself that you set up in the early evening. You lose some of the utility of the automation, but if you can set it up, polar align, and then using whatever software, say go, you can still walk away and use another telescope, and then put it away at the end of your observing night. So it's, although I will say that 20 years ago when I put up an observatory in the backyard, that was the best astronomical thing I've ever done. It is very handy being able to leave everything set up, ready to rock and roll,
Great.
for sure.
Yeah, to add with that, with the advancement with the harmonic drive mounts that are coming now or becoming more popular, I've also got one of these, and I can say these are great for semi-automated setups, because I can grab the mount, including the telescope and everything on it, and carry it outside, and I just have to plug it in with 2 cables, and I need to just polar align and can start my imaging run. So that's almost full automation. I just have to carry it outside, and it's really good to do. It was impossible to do that with the heavier mounts that I've used before that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. Okay, so our next question here is about during observing, do you generally need to run multiple pieces of software, like maybe one for the acquisition camera and one for the guiding camera, or do you need to run a planetarium separately? Or when you're looking at software, should you just be looking for one that does it all? Is that a thing? So Stefan and Bob, I figure you guys are probably the best to answer this one.
Yeah, for N.I.N.A, you will also need some other software. So for example, in N.I.N.A, to connect to various equipment, we also use the ASCOM platform for all devices that are capable of it. There are some native implementations of drivers, but there are also a lot of ASCOM drivers that are required. And also for guiding, we also have no native driver inside that. So you can use, for example, MetaGuide, PhD2, MGen, or the SkyGuard guiders that are all available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. There's no, I hear over the years, I've heard from a lot of people, why can't it all be done by one program? There's always something that fails. And so, then this thing, the mount gets jammed up, and then this software fails, and that software doesn't know what's going on because this software's failed and that software's depending on this software, and they get frustrated and say, I just want one that does it all. But can you imagine in an airplane, a giant black box in the bottom of the airplane that has a bunch of connectors on it that go to the toilet, the entertainment system, the engine, the navigation system, and all of that all coming into one black box? Nah, it's better to have a modular system. It just has to be designed so that there's integrity of communications between them. And so, but you're going to be using multiple pieces of software.
Okay.
In
There
general.
are also millions of different combinations of vendors and software from these. So it's impossible for one software to know about everything and have drivers for everything and so on. So it's really good that each vendor specializes in this part he knows best in, and then we have some automation software that makes use of it, and everything gets together there. Yeah.
The key is how they talk to each other. And that's
Exactly,
what the Alpaca and ASCOM's all about, is to standardize that so people like Stefan and others can develop software without having to know how every mount out there works internally.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, when N.I.N.A talks to a mount, it talks through the ASCOM interface, and it doesn't care which mount it is, because every mount is controlled the same way through the same ASCOM interfaces. And it's also important that these drivers all adhere to this ASCOM interface,
Right.
and then everything works flawlessly. Yeah.
Of course, all of that implies that on the PC side, whatever control computer you have has got to be comfortable running multiple threads. Right. I've got a minimal Celestar, is it? Pardon me? Celeron.
Yeah, I know what you're Celeron. That's it.
Celeron. And once I get to a second thread running, the whole thing bogs down. And you really need to have, I would think, 3 or 4 threads available. So get a reasonable computer.
This brings up a very important, what is the minimum set of equipment necessary? I hear stories all the time about somebody who goes and finds Uncle Festus's 20-year-old laptop in the garage, blows the dust off of it and tries to run their software on it, and then complains. And it's horrible. I mean, really, what Peter's talking about has not been an issue for 15 years.
Right.
Period. And so for a few $100s, I mean, imagine taking your better half out for dinner 2 or 3 times, and you've paid for a good computer, plenty good one. So it's a
point.
big issue. And I don't know, it's when, if you're going to automate, especially remote, you've got to have a solid computer, one that
Yeah.
was made maybe
Also
in the
for
last
That
the
makes
for the
sense.
year.
mobile setups, there are some really great mini PCs available with the latest Celeron. For example, this one is not as slow as the one described before. So this is also one that I'm using. It's really tiny. It's almost as small as my smartphone, and it just fits perfectly on the PC. Runs on 12 volt, and it's perfect.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to interject here because we have had an almost frightening number of questions come in while you guys have been discussing. And I want to make sure that a couple of these do get answered. So we had one come in here, a very interesting topic. Let's take how about 1 minute to answer this one. How important is climate control in your observatory?
Oh, you do not want climate control in your observatory, except during the day, where you would use an air conditioner to keep the temperature inside the observatory at the temperature that you would expect to encounter when you open it.
Mhm.
So that the telescopes don't have to cool down. And you want to keep your computer out of that environment, because it can be freezing, and it can be hot and damp and dew and everything else. So you don't want your computer in the observatory. You want it in a human comfortable space.
Okay, thank you.
However, with a roll-off roof, I found that I had to be really meticulous in the roof sealing seals, because otherwise I'd get dust and pollen coating everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, next question here. Can automation work well even with the rather low-end mounts, or at least non-expensive, like the Skywatcher NEQ6?
The one thing you have to watch out for is the mount has to be able to initialize itself without intervention. You have to turn the power on and then connect with your imaging software or N.I.N.A or ACP, and it has to not require manual intervention. You don't want to have to say okay on the hand paddle to continue. So that's sort of the dividing line. You need a mount that will happily wake up from power off and connect without being next to it.
That's really important.
Okay, thank you. Next question
And
here.
that's a subtle point that they don't really disclose very well.
Yeah.
Also, the state that it powered off, it needs to remember it if it powers on again, so that the mounting point model isn't screwed over.
Yeah,
So, for
so it
example,
doesn't need to be realigned every night.
Yeah,
It's
so
enough that some of these things have to be homed, and
Exactly.
some of them you don't even know if it needs to be homed.
yeah, many
That's a
mounts
problem
require
too.
you to start on the park position, and if you don't do that, it just slews randomly anywhere.
Right.
Right. That actually leads right into our next question here, which was about whether it's possible to do any kind of automation on a telescope that is only intermittently set up. So this is the non-dedicated observatory type setup.
Yes, and that's what Stefan was talking about. So,
Mhm.
portable rig, where you take it out, you get it, you have to do the polar alignment basically, and then you can turn it loose with the automation software.
Great. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, for this kind of setup, what you want to do is having everything prepared. So having, for example, the telescope already connected to the camera and the cables already lined up, so that you don't have to do all the wiring when you go out and have to do everything, and it takes hours until you even can start. So yeah, I've reached the state where I can just put it down, everything is there, plug in 2 cables and go.
Excellent. Okay. And then we had someone asking about, do you need a guide scope? Like, is that a requirement, or can you maybe do it with a off-axis guider?
Yeah, it's an either or, right?
Yeah,
either you have one.
if your mount is stable and well behaved, you don't need a guide scope.
Or an off-axis guider if you're taking short exposures.
Mhm.
But the
Okay,
guide scope
great.
has its own problems. It can flex differentially. But then the off-axis guider has its own problems in that it usually has a tiny field of view.
Mhm.
So are you
Also,
going
you
to
have
find
some
a
back
guide
focus
star in
problems.
there?
Yep.
Are you going to put a rotator on your thing and then have to wrestle with field of view indicators and rotated cameras? That's horrendous, especially for students. So you want to decide who your audience is. If it's just you, that's one thing. If you're having friends or students, it's totally different.
Mhm.
So I receive images from, like, I think I'm up to 8 automated remote instruments, the AAVSO Net instruments plus the Middleman Observatory instruments. None of them have guide scopes. None of them have off-axis guiders, but they're well polar aligned, and there are known exposure time limits. Okay, like I know I can take up to a 5-minute exposure from a Takahashi Epsilon 180 in 100 miles north of me in New Hampshire, but don't go to 10. Okay, so you got to know your limits, I think, is really what it comes down to, and you have to maintain them.
And for modern CMOS cameras, there's no penalty for taking a lot of short exposures and stacking.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
There are advantages.
Especially if that stacking is done on board the camera, which that's starting to become a technology as well, where you take a bunch of short exposures and they're stacked inside the camera. So you're not downloading, 100 huge images just to get one 5-minute huge image.
Okay, thank you. So our next question here comes from David, who says, I'm automating my portable setup, already transitioning from SharpCap to N.I.N.A. Thanks, Stefan. Will I soon need to transition from EQMod/ASCOM, or will this continue to serve?
As far as I know, it's all right.
Yeah, if it
Okay, great.
works, it should continue to work. Yeah, there are some alternatives, but in the meantime, for Skywatcher months, for example, there's the Screen Swamp server. But if EcoMod works, I'm still using it too. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does the same thing. I mean, that's the whole point, is that it doesn't matter which app is using the EQMod based telescope.
Mhm.
They all see the same telescope. So that's why ASCOM's good.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. All righty. So next question here. And this one, I think, Bob, you might be a good person to answer this one. Is it easier to set up remote control than full-blown automation?
It's kind of an odd question, because really, if you're going to do remote control, you probably want to have automation as a requirement, because you don't want to be logged in with remote desktop, pushing buttons and watching lights flash and moving the scope and all of that manually over remote desktop for a lot of reasons. What you want to be able to do is set up what you want, set things up, get in, get out, and let it run. So I would say an automated system is probably something you should have if you're going to do remote.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Not necessarily, but I mean, it's a much better way to go. In other words, address the automation first, decide how you want to do it. And then after you get everything running in your backyard, if you want to put it somewhere else, now you tackle those additional problems that you're going to run into.
Okay, thanks. All righty. Here we have someone asking a question. I bet this is on a lot of people's minds. What would be, just very ballpark figure, the minimum budget for setting up a fully automated observatory?
So I can answer that. It's about 10K. And that's for a 6-foot dome, motorized dome, 8mm refractor, color camera, relatively simple mount, but you have to have that ability to initialize it without being there.
Mhm.
So that's for a remote one. What if it's non-remote?
I don't know what you mean by not remote.
Well, I mean, you're within a couple 100 feet of it, so you can manually open and close dome or roof, perhaps, and you can actually go out to it and initialize and walk away.
I can't tell you the difference in cost between a mount that can do it and a mount that can't do it.
Stefan, did you want to weigh in on this one?
I can't give figures on that. Sorry.
Okay.
You know what?
Okay.
I will say one thing. Doug George, who is the father of Maxim and has bought out SBIG and runs diffraction up in Canada, he has a kind of a Moore's law type relationship. And what he says is the more money you spend, the more data you can get per unit time. So a less expensive observatory will get fewer images per unit time. And then as you spend more money, you can get more data per unit time. And I would tend to agree with him on that by looking at it. Because you get more sensitive camera, that takes less time to move the telescope. You know, everything adds up to being more efficient, more higher cadence, everything. So that's just a general rule of thumb. The more money you spend, the more you'll get out of your observatory.
Okay.
There's really not any fixed number there.
Well, I might suggest that the low end would be go out and buy a Unistellar, and those are $3,500. You put it out every night. It polar, I mean, it finds everything. It does the imaging for you, but it's not fully automated, right? You've got to control it from your cell phone.
Right.
And you have very limited. It's a very limited telescope. It's a 3-inch, 3.5-inch aperture, really small sensor.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, what's also important on this topic is that it's really a steep learning curve to get everything right. And if you get ahead of yourself and you crash, for example, your roof into your mount, then that's really bad. So go on it step by step, get comfortable with what you have. And once you are comfortable with it and you know you're limited by your equipment and not your lack of skill to use it, then
That's very good.
recommend to improve on the equipment. Yeah, because
Very,
otherwise you
very
spend
good.
thousands and thousands of dollars. This hobby is expensive and you get frustrated by it because it won't magically work just because you've spent a lot of money with it.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Excellent point, Stefan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So our next question here says the Pan-Optis project, instead of using an enclosure to store the telescope and mount, actually weatherproofs the entire observing rig and just leaves it outside. They just have a motorized cover for the pair of cameras mounted on the German equatorial mount. What is your opinion on this alternative way of doing things?
The weather is unkind to all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may live in the desert and it's okay, but connectors don't like rain, you know, and motors and gears, and so it's if you have again, there are so many factors, but if you the 10K number I threw out was you sit down and you purchase one of everything that you need, including computer software, dome that has motorization, motorized focuser, telescope mount, and there's still a lot of work to assemble it. And everybody wants to know, well, I have this old Mathis mount and only one of the worm gears is bad. How do I do that? And
Yeah, that's a tough one.
you know, so the 10K is, I just sat down and purchased things, make a list and buy them all and then put them together. And then there's an infinite number of, you know, amateur telescope makers in general are pretty clever people, and they're always on a budget, except for a few. And you can find equipment. You can make your own motorized focuser out of stepper motors and Arduinos. And so if you have a lot of time and cleverness, you can save money. But if you just want to like sit down and, I did a project for a school here and they just wanted to buy everything. And that's kind of the minimum set of things.
Mhm.
It's like $700 for a computer, it's $2,000 worth of software. It's the dome is maybe $5K. This motorized focuser, $700. Telescope might be $500 for a little one. Mounts $1,200, $1,500. Anyway, that's how it comes out.
Mhm.
Lauren, I'm looking at the Q&A board and I notice multiple questions, all of which relate to, can I use this 15-year-old Meade telescope, or I want to put encoders on this old scope, and all of these type of projects, especially Alan, I'm sure you know what the type of project you're getting into when you try to rehabilitate some old crufty mount and make it usable for automation. It's, you're going to end up being a hobbyist mechanical engineer and electrical engineer. And then what? Then now I've got this thing. Now, how do I control it with N.I.N.A? Well, you have to write an ASCOM driver. Oh, that's trivial. I could do it in a weekend. Not. There's no way. So you really, if you're going to do this, either borrow somebody's equipment or you're going to have to get stuff that's off the shelf, proven, that works, that's currently supported by a company. And I think that's probably my number one lament, is people who buy or use things that have no factory support, no support from anybody. They're abandonware because they're cheap. And then they try to make it work and they come to us for help. How do we know what goes on inside this type of equipment? We don't know the first thing about it. And you end up getting frustrated. People get frustrated by old abandonware software and equipment. I would say go to a retail store or a company that has a good reputation and buy what you need that works, something that the company will stand behind. That would be my number one recommendation.
There are, again, this group of people that we're talking to, there are a lot of inventive, clever, budget conscious, but they have a lot of time on their hands. And it can be done. It can be done. This Bowler and Chivens meter class telescope was free. Here you go. To all 27,000 pounds of it. And,
well, let them know how long it took you to get to where you are.
It's 10 years.
Yeah, there you go. Are you willing to put that kind of time into your remote operation before it comes online?
Right. And for some people, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And for some people they just want the email in the morning that says you have pictures.
Yep.
So there's a full range, but if you want my experience, I did it. We purchased kind of the smallest of everything that would work together, and it came out darn close to 10K. And that's not counting the effort to put it together. And it goes up, as far as you want. Oh, I'd really like to have a space telescope. Well, Elon Musk can take over Hubble. Elon Musk can take over Hubble, right? He can just launch another rocket and tune up Hubble, put a new camera in it. Ooh, look at that. So there's a full range of experience. There's a full range of budgets. There's a full range of cleverness. And that's the interesting thing about this. Well, what we're talking about is hobby. There's no I tell people astronomy, the people tend to be really nice. There's no professional astronomy. So there's like no cutthroat, business. Obviously, like Meade oversells things. But anyway, and if you enjoy creating stuff, this is a great thing to do. You can wind your own stepper motors. And nobody will stop you, but and that's what you might enjoy doing. And
this is the AAVSO, and I would assume that most of the people that are watching are interested in doing science and getting data and then reducing that data and coming up with science, and not being construction engineers and winding stepper motors and that sort of thing. So just to maybe stay on topic. This is this is like a total time sink. We could be here forever. So let's, maybe we could move on.
So the other end of the spectrum is you give jobs to AAVSO Net. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Zero effort there.
So
Yep.
Yeah, I think you both have excellent points here. It really is like a full continuum. At the one end, you have people who have no money, but all the time in the world. And on the other end, you've got people who've got the money to get it done and they don't have the time to spend on spending forever tuning up a telescope. And then there's everyone in between. And we're all on that spectrum somewhere. So thank you both. So our next question here, this is one that I'm curious about myself. Alexandros asked, how do you take flats remotely? How do you get the flat panel on the scope to do the taking of flats? What's this look like?
I could.
You can use, for small telescopes, you can use a thing called a flip flat, which is a motorized cover with a illuminator built into it. For larger things, the flat panel is usually not on the telescope. It's near, it can be near the telescope. And for this Bowler and Chivens, I've working on an open source flat field controller. And what we found is if you put a ring of LEDs on the front of the telescope, this LED strip light stuff, and you put and I wrote it up. I'll have to stick it somewhere on the AAVSO instrumentation thing. But basically styrofoam, white styrofoam makes a perfect screen because it's not white because of the chemical composition. It's white because of the structure. It's like snow, right? Snow is white, not because water is white. So all the paints, the white paints have spectral features, but white styrofoam doesn't, and it's cheap. It's $10 for a 4x8 foot sheet. And a ring of LEDs on the front of the telescope, if you put it one radius away from the screen, it's damn near perfectly flat. So it can be done inexpensively, and it can be remote controlled. And but you can't buy it. You gotta do a little work.
There are commercially available flat panels, and as he said, the flip flat actually will put the panel on top of the scope, and all of that is automated. You can to take a flat, basically, what does it look like? You move the scope to the flat panel if it's on the wall, or if it's on the dome, you may have to rotate the dome so that the flat panel, the dome is at an azimuth that puts the flat panel into a nice place for the scope. Move the scope there, take your flats. And how you control the light. One thing I should mention, you'd normally have to change the brightness of the light based on the filters. Otherwise, you end up taking super long images for your narrowband, for astro imagers, for narrowband filters, which is bad because if there's any light leaks, then that gets in your way, or super short exposures for the bright filters like V and R. And those are bad because you get shutter vignetting. So there's a sweet spot for the length of images, the duration of images for flats. And that's very different for different filters. So you need to be able to not only aim the scope at the flat panel or put the flip flat over, but you also need to be able to control the brightness of that thing to get your flat exposures into the sweet spot for the length of the exposure. So there's both of those things have to be.
Yeah, it's more than 300 to 1, the variation between what comes through a narrowband filter and the V filter.
Yeah.
So an 8-bit pulse width modulation isn't quite enough.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you. So Peter, you've been a little bit quiet. This question about flats though, for some reason I seem to remember hearing you had some experience with that. Did you have anything you wanted to add, or do you want to just leave it there?
I would just add that a lot of people, including myself, just do flats from the sky, while it's still relatively bright out. So
Okay,
there is an exact place in the sky, 70 degrees elevation, anti-solar. So if you point directly away from the sun and go up 80 or 70 degrees altitude, that has been proven by experiment and that that's the flattest part of the sky, and you can take flats there, but you're limited in the amount of time before it starts getting a gradient in it, and then your flats aren't good anymore. So there's a sweet spot there that you can use for sky flats. And when you do that right, they work very well.
Great, good to know. Okay, so we've got time for just a couple more questions before we need to start doing the closing. So let's see. Are there any automation suites out there that can track objects at a non-sidereal rate? For example, if you're interested in imaging a comet or studying an asteroid.
Yeah,
Yes,
actually, this can be done with
yeah, go
N.I.N.A
ahead.
too. Yeah. So
Yeah,
in
and same with
N.I.N.A,
ACP.
yeah, in N.I.N.A, we have a plugin for orbitals, it's called. It's built by one of our contributors. And there you have all kinds of asteroids. Also, you can track the JWST and so on. And it was also quite popular in the last month with the last comet that showed.
Comet, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's possible there too.
The mount has to be able to track offset from the normal sidereal tracking. I mean, what you know what I'm talking about, right? If you're going to track a star, basically the star stays still in the field. But if you're tracking something that moves with respect to the equatorial coordinate system, the mount has to be able to be told how fast against RA and how fast against DEC it needs to move. And that may actually change during the exposure. So you have to be able to calculate those rates, offsets, and send that to the mount. But that's what N.I.N.A has the plugin for. You tell it what you want, and it comes back and gives you those rates and sends it to the mount. And ACP, you tell it again with a name, designation, or number of a minor planet or a comet, and it goes to the MPC, looks up the orbital elements, calculates the rates at that moment, since it doesn't know when it's going to image. Again, the scheduler could do that, anytime the thing is in a. So you don't know what time it is. So you have to be able to calculate that stuff at the instant of the exposure. And it does that too.
Okay, thank you. All right, and our next question here. So this one's aimed specifically at Stefan. Bo asks, can I run N.I.N.A on a PC and then run everything else that I need on a Mac and still have my observatory work properly and, communicate in between the computers?
That's a tricky one. You would need some kind of interface to communicate and to get the data from the Mac to the PC. Maybe it's possible with some Alpaca drivers with the Alpaca bridge, but I don't see how that's feasible now.
No. What would you run on the Mac? N.I.N.A does everything for you, and you've got all of your equipment and the drivers for that equipment sitting on your PC as well. So what would, I don't know. I get questions like that. They go, well, I don't know. I like Mac better. And that's really about what it boils down to. And I don't know how to answer that question. Just focus on the task and not the OS. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's good advice in general. Good to know these things aren't really cross-platform. All righty.
Well,
so one more question here. While we're speaking about N.I.N.A specifically, Derek wanted to know if N.I.N.A can monitor the weather and close a roof if the weather conditions deteriorate. He says that his weather station and roof are ND compatible.
Yeah, so with N.I.N.A, you can also connect to the safety monitor, which is one of the ASCOM interfaces. And there you just have a simple flag that it's safe or not. And you can customize your sequence to react on this. So you could, for example, then close your roof or do some other interactions and do some other things when it's not safe, or then reopen it when it's safe. So that's possible, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There are some native weather things for N.I.N.A also, right? Where you have actual, but I don't think you guys want to go in that direction in the future. I shouldn't open my mouth on this, but there's a standard for that right now, that if his weather can speak through the observing conditions and safety monitor, if it answers to those things, then
yeah, we do have also we have the observing conditions too, but there's no trigger to close the roof on
Right.
that because
Safety
it's
monitor.
dangerous. Yeah, because it's dangerous because you can't rely, for example, on an open weather map that somewhere around your location it's raining or not,
That's
because
right.
it might be way too late or your observatory is already underwater when this thing still says it's
Right.
not raining.
That's a
So
good point.
you need a safety monitor device that specifically tracks the state of the current weather condition. Also not something that I don't know how it's called, that gathers the water first to indicate that it's raining, but it needs this infrared sensor, right, to see that it's really safe or not.
Wind is another issue.
True, yeah.
And like the places where the dust comes up, in New Mexico, skies being one, and when it gets windy, all that gypsum from down there in the desert blows up over the mountains, and and that stuff's hell on astronomy equipment.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, Peter, you've been rather quiet. Was there something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have a question for Stefan, actually. Ken Menzies, one of the AAVSO Net managers, asked me to ask my question about, earlier on you showed an astrophotography kind of demo, if you will, from N.I.N.A. How would that work with respect to doing an exoplanet transit, where you need to take hundreds or thousands of images of one object and maybe have to track it through a flip, on your German equatorial mountain?
Yeah, so I haven't done this myself, but there's one contributor in the community that also created a plugin specifically for exoplanet transits, and it takes all the heavy load from you. So you just specify what you want to image, and it just replaces the deep sky container that I showed earlier with this exoplanet container, and then you can specify what you want to do there, and it shows
Very
you when the
nice.
transit is
Cool.
and so on. And yeah, that's the power of the plugin framework. It extends on very special use cases the capabilities of the core application. Yeah.
Thanks.
Very nice, thank you. Okay, so I think we are getting down towards the our time limit now, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask a couple of questions that I think are generally applicable to everyone here, hopefully. So first of all, and if all of you guys want to weigh in on this, that would be great. After this webinar, where should someone go in order to learn more about automating their own equipment? In particular, do you have any detailed guides that you would recommend that people go look at?
I would start off by going to your local astronomy club, because I think the odds are pretty good that somebody in that club has already done an automation project. And, if you find that person, that's perfect for you.
Absolutely.
Assuming that their outlook on astronomy is similar to yours. Again, in Alan Sliskey's wide spectrum, you may find someone who has lots of time and is able to devote 80% of their time to tinkering and 10% or 20% to astronomy. That might not be you. So try to find somebody who's automated in sort of that same frame of mind that you're in. That would be the only thing I would add on that.
The other thing I would suggest is start with something. If you start with a telescope mount and a focuser and a camera, try to get those three things to work together before you add the dome and whatever the next thing. But you can get started with a few inexpensive things, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of learning to do, and nothing beats just digging in.
Mm-hmm. And Alan,
Is this
do you have any particular guides or anything that you would recommend someone starts with when they're digging in?
I don't know if there is such a thing.
Yeah, okay.
YouTube
Yeah,
videos
I don't know.
and Cloudy Nights forums. The information is not all nice and neatly organized. And again, because people's interests are diverse and the equipment is diverse. And it's, there's somebody on the chat says, oh, will N.I.N.A run on a Raspberry Pi? Well, I don't know. Will it run on a PDP-8? I don't know. There's always somebody with an old computer in the garage. Oh, you know.
Yeah, but that's what I was talking about before.
Mhm.
You're
So-
focused on the wrong thing, basically. That's not the place to look.
Yeah, there's lots of learning to do. Stefan, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, as I said earlier, start slow, get to know the
Yeah.
basics. It's really a complicated hobby, especially if you want to dig deeper into it, especially if you want to go full automation. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of money you need to spend. As you heard,
Mhm.
the bare minimum was 10K. I doubt that you can get it for 10K around here. Maybe it's in the US cheaper, I don't know. But yeah, understand the topics, maybe get someone local as a mentor that can guide you through the beginning. Especially the beginning is the hardest part. For me, for example, I started completely blind into this hobby and it was a lot to digest there. It took me a long time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And quite related to that, I wanted to ask you guys what your opinion is on when someone should start looking into automation. If you're still relatively a beginner, fairly new to, maybe not just new to variable stars, but also fairly new to anything astronomy imaging, should you wait a while and get a bunch of experience with your telescope before you start trying to automate it? Or will it make it easier on you if you just, suck it up and get it automated ASAP? What's your opinion?
You have to understand the basics.
Yeah.
So you should do everything manually first. Get a little time on a remote automated telescope like AAVSO Net, or some of their commercial telescope farms that rent time on nicely maintained telescopes for, I don't know, $80 an hour or something. Invest $80, takes pictures. And there's a huge learning curve in image processing, after you get the images. That's a whole world unto itself.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And all right, so next question. Are there any common misconceptions which you encounter over and over and over again when you're helping amateurs set up automated systems? And if so, what is the one thing, let's limit it to 1 minute, that you would like to say to correct those misconceptions? So I'm going to go one by one here. Let's start with you, Peter. You've got anything?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception that you can go out there, cut a check or use your credit card, whatever, and buy a complete system ready to rock and roll immediately. And I don't think you can really do that yet. It's still bits and pieces, and it's still making everything play together nicely. There's just no free lunch out there. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You've got to incrementally learn to use equipment, and probably even purchase equipment. Start simple, start adding things, add an electronic focuser, add a camera, whatever. But, you got to learn to walk before you can run. Mm-hmm. Unless you got oodles and oodles of money and you can hire a consultant to do it all for you. And I know where you can find one of those.
Sorry.
True. Okay. Bob, did you want to go next?
Don't try to automate something that doesn't work. Trying to automate it won't make it work. I hear this all the time. Well, yeah, I've got to go hit the scope with a hammer before it'll track or whatever. In the questions, in the Q&A, there is one post that ends with 10 years of hell. And you can probably find that if other people can look at it. But there's the story. I mean, don't try to do stuff like that. Everything has to work right. It has to work reliably. And you need to understand like what's right ascension and declination. And I honestly have talked to people who don't know what that is and want to do stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know, man, you've got a ways to go. So anyway, that would be, don't try to automate equipment that doesn't work manually. That's probably the number one thing. that I've run into. When I say not work, well, yeah, but if the focuser gets this far out, then it gets hung up and I've got to go out and hit it, or whatever. That kind of stuff, just you're going to live like the poor guy on there, that it will be hell on, you'll just curse it forever. Make sure everything works right.
Yeah. Okay. Good advice. Thank you. Stefan, did you want to go next?
Yeah, I can only emphasize what Peter already said. So money won't buy you the automation. It will alleviate some problems. So it will make more consistent equipment with better spending. Yeah, but it won't prevent problems that are there in the first place because of wrong user interaction, for example.
Right.
So you need to know the basics.
Okay. Thank you. Alan?
Yeah, I want to tell a short story. I was helping a fellow trying to get his backyard observatory. He retired. He was in a technical field, and somebody gave him a book about what to do when you retire. And one of the things was get a hobby. So he decided he's going to get a hobby, and he picked astronomy. And he started buying stuff. He bought a dome, he bought a telescope, a mount, everything. And but there was a whole layer of understanding that was missing. For example, he read about dew heaters. So he bought dew heaters and he put them on the telescope and everything. But he actually put a dew heater on the tube between the telescope and the camera, right, where the eyepiece would otherwise go. And he was cooking the camera. And there's no book that says don't put a dew heater on the camera. So, and unless you have some idea of how this stuff works and why it's put together the way it is, and what a dew heater is for and what it's not for, you can be trouble. Now, he's much smarter now than when he started, but he was learning the hard way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just takes longer.
Yeah, very much a learning process.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. And this one overlaps a lot with the past questions, but I just want to give you guys one more chance. What is one piece of practical advice, short and sweet, which you would give to anyone who's about to start automating their setup, just as the motto to work by, right?
Make a plan and follow the plan. So I make a detailed block diagram of everything, with every USB cable, every Ethernet cable, everything. And do all your thinking there, and then connect everything according to the plan. Don't wing it. The miracle of modern civilization is that we design things and then we build to the design. This is how the only reason the world exists the way it is, interchangeable parts and things like that. So design it, lay it out it can be a piece of paper or some sort of free graphic software, whatever, but think it through, count how many cables, think about how long the USB cables really need to be, and then hook it up according to the design.
Okay. Peter, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Advice? Okay. Stefan, do you want to take an opportunity to give just a one-liner advice to someone?
Yeah, I mean, Alan already said it, what needs to be done. But also remember, imaging is only half of the matter. The post-processing is also a big part.
Yeah, true. Definitely when you're doing imaging. Yeah.
And planning, figuring out what you want to do and when.
Make the plan, stick to the plan. I like that advice. Thanks, y'all. Okay, now just one last question for y'all. Was there any topic which did not come up during this discussion which you would like to address before we close out? Anything you were hoping someone would ask and then that didn't happen?
Well, I've got one.
Okay.
For remote observing, being as that's part of this, what I have found recently in working with my remote customers is that the Starlink system, if you use that, is wonderful. It is light years ahead of the old Hughes satellite. I mean, if you have a strong 4G cell phone capability where you can put a cradle point and a directional antenna and use cellular data, that's pretty good too. But a lot of places don't. And if you don't, or if it's unreliable or whatever, and you go to use the Starlink system, I guess you all know what that is by now. There's only been 100 some odd launches of rockets for that. And it works great. It's low latency. The mouse moves nice and smooth across the screen if you're logged in with remote desktop, which I do because I have to sometimes get in and service things. And I'm just really impressed with it. So that's an alternative if you can't get real cable or, fiber or whatever for your internet to log into your remote observatory.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have a question which didn't come up that you want to answer anyway?
Yeah, I've got a comment, which is, I'm sure anybody that's trying to do this has stumbled across. It's generally referred to as cable management. Where you have a USB cable hanging out of the back of the camera and the filter wheel, and when the mount slews or does a flip, it yanks the cable out, breaks the connector. Avoid, spend as much time as it needs to make sure that's all perfect, because it will save you a lot of effort in the end. I avoid USB and serial connections because those are directly connected to the PC motherboard. They can only be so long, and it's not far enough. 16-foot USB cable is not far enough away for a human to be from an automated telescope. So I use Ethernet, fiber optics, any number of different things, but not, observatories are placed in situations that are lightning prone, tops of hills and things like that. And USB and serial things will blow out the computer because it's a lightning antenna. Mm-hmm. And it's connected directly to the semiconductors on your motherboard. Ethernet is galvanically isolated. There's little transformers in every connector, and fiber optics are really the best way to go.
Okay. Good to know. Good advice. Thank you. Stefan, have you had a chance to answer this one? Did you have a question which wasn't asked that you want to answer anyway?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that was our last question on the list. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and put up the closing slide here. There we go. Okay, I think this was a good session. To close things out, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Alan, Bob, Peter, and Stefan for sharing their time and knowledge with us today. This really has been great. Thank you, guys. I would also like to thank again, before we log out, our series sponsor, Boyce Astro. The Boyce Research Initiative and Education Foundation provides online astronomy education, observatory resources, and research experiences to students, student teams, and schools in order to learn how to perform observations, conduct research, and publish their results in scientific journals, such as the Journal of the AAVSO. Please do check out their webpage to learn more about their work. Hey, today I would also like to address a special thank you to everyone who showed up and participated. Your excellent questions really helped to make today's session into something special. And even more than that, it's your participation in all of our programs that allows us to keep growing, keep educating, and keep making an impact on variable star science. So thank you, each of you. We couldn't be more grateful for your support.